Dhanavad Pranam. Namaste. All glories to Om Vishnu Pad, Srila Bhakti Rakshak, Sri Radev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to Om Vishnu Pad, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. All glories to Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Ki Jai. Canto 1, Chapter 2, Text 9. Dharmasya hi apovargyasya narto taupya kalpate nartasya dharma kantasya kamho labhaya hi smrita. All occupational engagements are certainly meant for ultimate liberation. They should never be performed for material gain. Furthermore, according to the sages, one who is engaged in the ultimate occupational service should never use material gain to cultivate sense gratification. Purport from Srila Prabhupada. We have already discussed the pure devotional service to the Lord is automatically followed by perfect knowledge and detachment from all material existence. But there are others who consider that all kinds of different occupational engagements, including those of religion, are meant for material gain. The general tendency for any ordinary man in any part of the world is to gain some material profit in exchange for religious or any other occupational service. Even in the Vedic literatures, for all sorts of religious performances, an allurement of material gain is offered, and most people are attracted by such allurements, or blessing of religiosity. Why are such so-called men of religion allured by material gain? Because material gain can enable one to fulfill desires, which in turn satisfy sense gratification. This cycle of occupational engagements includes so-called religiosity, followed by material gain, and material gain, followed by fulfillment of desires. Sense gratification is the general way for all sorts of fully occupied men. But in the statement of Sutta Goswami, as per the verdict of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, this is nullified by the present shloka. One should not engage himself in any sort of occupational service for material gain only, nor should material gain be utilized for sense gratification. How material gain should be utilized is described as follows. Text 10. Kamasya nandriha pritir labho jiveta yavata jivasya tattva jigyasya nartoyascheha karmabhi. Life's desires should never be directed towards sense gratification. One should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation, since a human being is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth. Nothing else should be the goal for one's work. Purport. The completely bewildered material civilization is wrongly directed towards the fulfillment of desires and sense gratification. In such civilization, in all spheres of life, the ultimate end is sense gratification. In politics, social service, altruism, philanthropy, and ultimately in religion or even in salvation, the very same tint of sense gratification is ever increasingly predominant. In the political field, the leaders of men fight with one another to fulfill their personal sense gratification. The voters adore the so-called leaders only when they promise sense gratification. As soon as the voters are dissatisfied in their own sense satisfaction, they dethrone the leaders. The leaders must always disappoint the voters by not satisfying their senses. The same is applicable in all other fields. No one is serious about the problems of life. Even those who are on the path of salvation desire to become one with the absolute truth and desire to commit spiritual suicide for sense gratification. But the Bhagavatam says that one should not live for sense gratification. One should satisfy the senses only in so much as required for self-preservation, and not for sense gratification. Because the body is made of senses which also require a certain amount of satisfaction, there are no regulative directions for satisfaction of such senses. But the senses are not meant for unrestricted enjoyment. For example, marriage or the combination of a man and woman is necessary for progeny, but it is not meant for sense enjoyment. In the absence of voluntary restraint, there is propaganda for family planning. But foolish men do not know the family planning is automatically executed as soon as there is search for the absolute truth. Seekers of the absolute truth are never allured by unnecessary engagements in sense gratification, because the serious students seeking the absolute truth are always overwhelmed with the work of researching the truth. In every sphere of life, therefore, the ultimate end must be seeking after the absolute truth. And that sort of engagement will make one happy because he will be less engaged in varieties of sense gratification. And what absolute truth is explained as follows. What that absolute truth is explained as follows. Text 11. Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yajnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti Bhagavan iti sabdyate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. Purport. The absolute truth is both subject and object, and there is no qualitative difference there. Therefore, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are qualitatively one and the same. The same substance is realized as impersonal Brahman by the students of the Upanishads, as localized Paramatma by the Hiranyagarbhas or the yogis, and as Bhagavan by the devotees. In other words, Bhagavan, or the personality of Godhead, is the last word of the absolute truth. Paramatma is the partial representation of the personality of Godhead, and the impersonal Brahman is the glowing effulgence of the personality of Godhead, as the sun rays are to the sun god. Less intelligent students of either of the above schools sometimes argue in favor of their own respective realization, but those who are perfect seers of the absolute truth know well that the above three features of the one absolute truth are different perspectives, views, seen from different angles of vision. As it is explained in the first shloka of the first chapter of Bhagavatam, the supreme truth is self-sufficient, cognizant, and free from the illusion of relativity. In the relative world, the knower is different from the known. But in the absolute truth, both knower and the known are one and the same thing. In the relative world, the knower is the living spirit, or superior energy, whereas the known is inert matter, or inferior energy. Therefore, there is a duality of inferior and superior energy, whereas in the absolute realm, both the knower and the known are of the same superior energy. There are three kinds of energies of the supreme energetic. There is no difference between the energy and the energetic, but there is a difference of quality of energies. The absolute realm and the living entities are of the same superior energy, but the material world is inferior energy. The living being in contact with the inferior energy is illusioned, thinking he belongs to the inferior energy. Therefore, there is the sense of relativity in the material world. In the absolute, there is no such sense of difference between the knower and the known, and therefore everything there is absolute. Text 12. Tachstradha dadhanha munayo gyanha varagya yuktaya pasyanti atmani chatmanam bhaktya shruta grihitaya. The seriously inquisitive student or sage, well equipped with knowledge and detachment, realizes that the absolute truth by rendering devotional service in terms of what he has heard from the Vedanta Shruti. Purport. The absolute truth is realized in full by the process of devotional service to the Lord. Vasudeva, or the personality of Godhead, who is the full-fledged absolute truth. Brahman is his transcendental bodily effulgence, and Paramatma is his partial representation. As such, Brahman or Paramatma realization of the absolute truth is but a partial realization. There are 4 different types of human beings: the karmis, the jnanis, the yogis, and the devotees. The karmis are materialistic, whereas the other 3 are transcendental. The first class transcendentalists are the devotees who have realized the Supreme Person. The second class transcendentalists are those who have partially realized the plenary portion of the Absolute Person. And the third class transcendentalists are those who have barely realized the spiritual focus of the Absolute Person. As stated in Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literatures, the Supreme Person is realized by devotional service, which is backed by full knowledge and detachment from material association. We have already discussed the point that the devotional service is followed by knowledge and detachment from material association. As Brahman and Paramatma realization are imperfect realizations of the Absolute Truth, so the means of realizing Brahman and Paramatma, i.e. the paths of Jnana and Yoga, are also imperfect means of realizing the Absolute Truth. Devotional service, which is based on the foreground of full knowledge, combined with detachment from material association, and which is fixed by the oral reception of Vedanta Shruti, is the only perfect method by which the seriously inquisitive students can realize the Absolute Truth. Devotional service is not, therefore, meant for the less intelligent class of transcendentalists. There are 3 classes of devotees, namely first, second, and third. The third class devotees, or the neophytes who have no knowledge and are not detached from material association, but who are simply attracted by the preliminary process of worshiping the deity in the temple, are called material devotees. Material devotees are more attached to material benefit than transcendental profit. Therefore, one has to make a definite progress from the position of material devotional service to second-class devotional position. In the second-class position, the devotee can see 4 principles in the devotional line, namely the personality of Godhead, his devotees, the ignorant, and the envious. One has to raise himself at least to the stage of the second-class devotee, and thus become eligible to know the Absolute Truth. A third-class devotee, therefore, has to receive the instructions of a devotional service from the authoritative sources of the Bhagavata. The number 1 Bhagavat is the established personality of devotee, and the other Bhagavatam is the message of Godhead. A third-class devotee, therefore, has to go to the personality of devotee in order to learn the instructions of devotional service. Such a personality of devotee is not a professional man who earns his livelihood by the business of Bhagavatam. Such a devotee must be a representative of Shukadeva Goswami, like Sutta Goswami, and must preach the cult of devotional service for all-around benefit of all people. A neophyte devotee has very little taste for hearing from the authorities. Such a neophyte devotee makes a show of hearing from a professional to satisfy his senses. This sort of hearing and chanting has spoiled the whole thing, so one should be very careful about the faulty process. The holy messages of Godhead, as inculcated by the Bhagavad Gita or Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, are undoubtedly transcendental subjects. But even though they are so, such transcendental matters are not to be received from the professional man, who spoils them as the serpent spoils milk simply by the touch of his tongue. A sincere devotee must therefore be prepared to hear the Vedic literature like the Upanishads, Vedanta, and other literatures left by the previous authorities, or Goswamis, for the benefit of his progress. Without hearing such literatures, one cannot make actual progress. And without hearing and following the instructions, the show of devotional service becomes worthless and therefore a sort of disturbance in the path of devotional service. Unless, therefore, devotional service is established on the principles of Shruti, Smriti, Purāna, or Pancharatra authorities, the make show of devotional service should at once be rejected. An unauthorized devotee should never be recognized as a pure devotee. By assimilation of such messages, from the Vedic literatures, one can see the all-pervading localized aspect of the personality of Godhead within his own self constantly. This is called samadhi. And thus ends our reading for today. We'll continue from text 13 on Friday. All glories to Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Nirmala Acharya Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to Om Vishnupad Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to our Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees Ki Jai, Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the worldwide devotees Ki Jai. All glories to Shripad Bhakti Niskam Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to Shripad Bhakti Vigyan Muni Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. All glories to Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. All glories to Giri Govardhan Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Nitai Gaura Hari Hari Bol.